Are you thinking about going to flight school but don't know where to begin? Are you confused with a Part 61 versus a Part 141 school? Or are there just too many options in your area and you don't know which to pick? Well, in today's video, I'm going to answer everything you need to know when picking a flight school, or what type of school to pick, my secrets on how to save money during school, and the path I would choose if I were to start from scratch day one all over again. Hi, I'm Dalton Mack with Path to Pilot, and after 10 years in corporate America, I decided to pursue my dreams of becoming a pilot. This channel is dedicated to helping you on your aviation journey with tips to save time and money and move through flight school efficiently to help you get the pilot job that you have always wanted. Let's go ahead and get started. Before we jump into all of that, let's talk about the different types of flight schools out there. There's a Part 61 and a Part 141. Basically, these come down to the regulations. In the FAR, or Federal Aviation Regulations, it breaks down the rules certifying for your pilot license and the regulations for flight schools themselves. In essence, while Part 61 deals with pilot certifications and the specific requirements to do so, whereas Part 141 certifies flight schools and the requirements needed from them and their pilots. So what are the differences and what does that mean for you, a brand new pilot looking to start their aviation journey? Well, both types of schools have their pros and cons. There's a couple of ways to really look at these schools and break them down by structure, by time commitment, time requirements, and cost, of course. So let's break it down a little bit. Because a Part 61 is strictly the requirements for certification, they tend to be more flexible and training tailored to the student, though Part 141 route also does this as well. Meanwhile, Part 141 schools have a set curriculum and are regulated by the FAA in order to operate. So while yes, you can still get that tailored training, there is a set route you have to follow and then work with your CFI to build in the additional time to practice. So people, they may like structure, others may be a little more go with the flow. It's all preference. That being said, 141 schools also have stage checks. You can also think of them as practice check rides, if you will, for each section of the curriculum and to help prep you for the actual check ride when you get each license. So very, very helpful there, but they can also be a little stress. Now let's talk about time. A good way to look at whether to go to a 61 or a 141 is to look at part-time versus full-time. Now you can certainly do full-time at each, but for the most part, a 141 will really require that full-time commitment in order to stay on path with the lesson plan. Whereas Part 61, this can be great if you plan on flying on the weekends or a couple times a month. Now I will say this, I tried to do that route at first and it's not as simple as you think. However, probably the more practical route for most people, especially if you're just trying to get your feet wet and decide if aviation is for you, or you just have a busy schedule or are working your job as well. I'm going to bunch cost and time requirements together because they kind of run hand in hand. What I mean by that is Part 141 schools require less flight time to get your ratings versus a Part 61, which can require more time. And why that is because the 141s are regulated by the FAA. I'll get to that a little bit more in a moment and touch on the specifics, but let's talk about those costs first. Every school is going to have a price sheet readily available for prospective students. Since flight schools can cost anywhere from $50,000 to $100,000, and most people don't have that burning a hole in their pocket, it is absolutely in your best interest to shop around and ask for this everywhere in your area. Rental costs, those vary by school and by plane, and their rates are all across the board for what you may be paying for. You can expect to pay anywhere from $150 to $250 plus for the plane rental. Plus instructor time is another $50 to $100 an hour. And some schools may even charge you for fuel as well. These are all questions I would ask when going around to the different flight schools in your area. Super, super important question to ask because you want that competitive rate. Now, when it comes to the different types of school, a 61 or a 141, and which is cheaper, it really depends. For example, at my school, the 141 route is cheaper than the 61 route just because of the different type of plane that's rented. However, it is more expensive than the first Part 161 school that I started with. The drawback of that is that school, they charge you for the fuel used, whereas my current school does not. So that hourly rate might have been advertised at 120 an hour. I usually ended up having to pay an additional $50 or so in fuel for every hour of that lesson. And that was not originally anticipated for until I understood those costs. So all the more reason to really ask about every single cost and ask if there are any additional fees, such as fuel, when you're going around talking to these flight schools. I'll talk a little bit more later on why I switched schools and why it does not hurt to shop around and find the best school that is going to fit your needs just a little bit later. Now, going into that time commitment piece and where cost fits in, like I said before, Part 141 schools have less time requirements than Part 61. For example, for your private pilot license, you need 35 hours versus a 40 at a Part 61. Whereas for your instrument time, you need 35 hours on a 141 versus 40 at the 61 as well. Plus, you also need 50 additional cross-country hours before applying for that instrument license. Now, for a commercial license, that's where you really are going to see that largest difference and where the costs can really add up. For a commercial license at a 141, you need 190 hours. Whereas at a Part 61, that number goes up to 250 hours. So let's ballpark and say you're paying the national average for flight instruction at $200 an hour. For that additional 60 hours of flight time, you could spend more than $12,000 going through a Part 61 school. That number is no joke, especially in today's day and age. So I'll say this though, for your private pilot license, the national average to obtain it is between $60 and $75 an hour. So it's not that big of a deal whether you go to a 61 or a 141. When it gets to instrument and commercial, that's when you can really see an impact. Technically, that 50 hours of cross-country time required for instrument can also play into the time for your commercial rating as well. However, that is still an additional 60 hours that you have to pay for. So going 141 in this instance makes way more sense in the long run. No doubt about that. So as you can see, there are some big differences between each type of school. Some other considerations when it comes to flight schools are going to be a couple things. Like I said above, Part 141, they have stage checks, while 61s don't. Some people have said these can, potentially ruin your career prospects if you fail, but I haven't found a ton of sufficient evidence to suggest that to be entirely true. I mean, unless you're failing every stage check, that might raise some red flags for the recruiter, but otherwise, I don't think that's necessarily going to be the case if you can explain it. Also, be aware of schools that are advertised as 141 and are actually Part 61. There's an extremely popular nationwide school out there with some heavy marketing that does this. So just make sure you're doing your research and really understanding what you're getting yourself into. There are also a lot of Part 141 schools that also have a Part 61 branch to them as well, to allow for a little more flexibility for their students. So maybe you like one school that is a Part 141, but you need the flexibility of a 61. They may also offer that as well, so it doesn't hurt to ask. Lastly, be aware that if you switch types of schools, the hours flown may not go towards credit for the other types of school curriculum. So, for example, if you're going to a Part 61, only 25% of that credit goes towards your hours for that rating if you transfer to a 141. And that just has to do with the standardization of training required by the FAA. They want to ensure that you've received regulated training and aren't just transferring in a ton of hours where maybe you just flew the same maneuver for 30 hours trying to learn it and are trying to just transfer that over, and that hasn't really excelled your aviation career. So let me tell you a little bit about my experience, and hopefully that can help you out. I switched from a 61 to a 141 and could not be any happier. Originally, I was planning on going the 61 route and flying every weekend, twice a weekend to get my private ratings, and then was going to transfer to a 141 full-time after that. Well, after 4 months of the 61 school and only flying every few weeks due to maintenance issues with their planes and some scheduling conflicts, I decided to make the switch and go full time to the 141. Instantaneously, I was impressed. The 141 was way more put together and professional, and you can tell they really put detail and attention into the school. I like the syllabus, I like the structure. That's just how my brain works, and it makes it easier to plan ahead. And honestly, I prefer the planes that were flying here as well. What I did like about the Part 61 school was you get a discount for putting cash on your account, and you could pay credit card without a surcharge. Unfortunately, where I'm at now, it costs more, but I'm also willing to pay a little bit more for that better training experience. Part 141s also have stage checks. Those aren't my favorite, but they are good preparation for the check ride. They just add some additional stress. And when you're just trying to cram it all in, who wants more additional stress, right? So here's the most important piece I want you to take away from this section though. Part 61 and Part 141 schools have a ton of pros and cons, and it truly depends on what is going to fit your individual needs, your schedule, and budget. However, the thing to keep in mind, whether you go with 61 or 141, the certificate you get issued by the FAA is all the same, no matter what. There is zero special markings on it from whichever type of school you went to, and airline recruiters, they have no preference for this either. So what do you prefer, a Part 61 or a Part 141? Drop a comment in the sections below and let me know what you think and what you're leaning towards. When it comes to choosing the right flight school for you, there are a number of considerations to think about. You want to take a look at a number of topics like safety, reputation, structure, fleet, their location, and cost, of course. So here's a couple of questions to ask, but there are way more out there. This is just to give you a ballpark idea of what you should go in there at bare minimum. For safety, ask what their track record is. Have they had any major incidents, any major accidents, anything like that? Reputation, check Yelp, Google, any reviews like that. Go to the flight school and ask questions, right? Wait in the parking lot and ask their students questions. I know that might sound a little crazy, but hey, that's going to give you the real inside scoop. But on top of that, ask how often are they passing their ratings? How often are other students graduating? Or are they just washing out? I mean, that gives you an idea of what the education looks like at that school. Next is the structure itself. Do you have a set syllabus to help guide your learning? How flexible are they to fit your needs? Do they have enough instructors to give you enough time, or are you going to be waiting weeks to get scheduled out for training? This can be particularly tough if you're going to a Part 61 route at a small school, just because, hey, maybe they don't have enough instructors for all of their students. In terms of the fleet, what types of planes are they flying? Are they up to date on the required maintenance records, and how old are those planes? As an instructor, ask them, how often are they running into any sort of mechanical issues? These are all great questions to ask just to help you get a very large picture of that school. When it comes to location, what does your commute look like? Is this going to dissuade you from getting your ratings? For example, if it's on the other side of town and you have to go after work, do you want to fight traffic, and will this prevent you from going all in on your dreams? Definitely some things to consider there, because I've seen it happen with a couple students. Lastly, cost. Ask for that price sheet, the total cost out the door on those rentals, and any other costs or things that they might require you to buy or rent in order to train. There's a lot of little things that you're going to need. So let's talk a little bit more on tips to save some money. That is going to be huge. Aviation is incredibly expensive. You're going to spend roughly $50,000 to $100,000 on your ratings if you plan on doing this professionally, and you have costs for little items that come up all the time. Think things like iPads and headsets and an ADS-B receiver. So here's some tips I have to help you maximize your time and save you some money. First, try and negotiate your rate. I've heard some people doing this and having some success, particularly in the 61 route. Not so much in a 141 just because of regulations, but it's worth asking. Discounts and surcharges, that is also another great question to ask. Like, hey, do you get a discount by paying cash or putting money on an account? Or is there a surcharge for paying with credit or check or something like that? And let me preface by saying this. If a school wants you to put all of the money for your rating in up front, don't do that. That way, if you decide, hey, this isn't for you, you might only get some of that money back. Unfortunately, there's just some shady businesses out there that operate this way and are going to prorate it and potentially could screw you over. But conversely, if you could put maybe $2,000 to $3,000 in your account at a time and you get a little bit of a discount, do that for sure. Any little bit helps. There's no doubt about that. If you don't have an iPad, you're definitely going to need one. Go on Amazon and get a refurbished iPad mini. They are incredibly inexpensive. They should have somewhat of a warranty and they fit great in the cockpit. An iPad mini is absolutely the way to go as a pilot. For those other training materials, like a headset or an ADS-B receiver you'll eventually need, or other basic items like foggles for instrument training and fuel sumps, go on eBay. You can generally buy them new or used for cheaper than Amazon, or at least have a very competitive pricing. So here is my absolute biggest secret that is going to save you a ton of money when it gets to flight school. Basically, instead of paying your instructor $50+ an hour to teach you the knowledge piece on flying, do an online ground school. I'll say that again, an online ground school. I use Gold Seal, however, there's some other great ones out there, such as Sporties and King Air as well, and there's a couple others, just look it up. Then you're gonna wanna go to Shepherd Air to refine your knowledge for the written test that you're gonna have to take to get your certifications. The written test is about $250 each time you take it, maybe a little bit more, maybe a little bit less, but somewhere in that ballpark. So it's definitely something that you only want to take once and pass. So for the cost of 2 to 3 hours with an instructor in person, it will save you an incredible amount of money and teach you everything you need to know. And on top of that, you can always go back to those lessons and rewatch them as many times as you want. I'll also say this, YouTube is another great resource. If there's something that's not clicking that I'm learning from my CFI and I'm not getting it from ground school, I go to YouTube and watch as many videos as I can to just try and relearn that content over and over and over and over again. It helps tremendously. Finally, don't be afraid to change schools or instructors. If you aren't getting what you need out of the teaching style of that CFI, like if that doesn't work for you, then hey, that is also going to cost you money in flight time trying to learn or relearn. I talked about this in depth in my first video, everything you need to know to become an airline pilot. And I'll put a link below for that if you haven't seen it. But you are the paying customer. If something isn't working for you, go and change it, especially if you are spending such a large amount of money on training and on school. You should absolutely demand the best for yourself and get the proper training that you need to fly safely and efficiently, or proficiently rather. So let me give you my 2 cents. Everyone has different paths, and if I were starting over, I would do a Part 61 school to learn, and typically for a cheaper cost while not having to do any of the stage checks for a Part 141 school. Yes, I did this route, and they are super beneficial to help prep for the check rides, but the average person can probably get away with not doing this route. Just some food for thought. Plus, you likely will fly 60 to 70 hours to learn, so the lower minimums don't matter that much at this step either, unless you just know aviation back and forth. After that, definitely switch to a Part 141 for instrument and for commercial. This will save you a ton of time on the time requirements, cutting that instrument down from the 50 hours you need to get it and dropping your commercial requirements from 250 to 190 hours. At this point in your education, hopefully you want to do aviation as a career, and going full time will get you to that seniority much, much faster. After that, get your CFI and everything else at a 141 and do everything you can to become an instructor there to build hours after that, of course. From what I hear, airlines prefer instructors from Part 141 schools because the structure is much more similar to a Part 121 airline. Basically, that's the regulations for an airline. But hey, that's it. This is everything you need to know to pick that right flight school. So hey, if you like this video, please give me a like and a subscribe for more of this content. It definitely helps a small channel like mine reach more viewers and help them out as well. If there are more topics that you're looking for, drop a comment below and I'll make the video. But that being said, hey, I'm Dalton Mack and I'll see you on the path to becoming a pilot.